Arizona is world-renowned for its natural wonders, especially its beautiful land, not least of which is the Sonoran Desert, with vast expanses broken by scattered low mountain ranges all the way to the Mexican border. The desire to answer the call of the land has drawn people to the Sonoran Desert for generations. Here, in what is now southeastern Arizona, the San Pedro River Valley was first home to native peoples who camped and traveled along the low-lying mountain ranges of the area and held out during white settlement in Cochisa's stronghold. The mountains also drew seekers of fortune, from the Spanish explorers in search of the city of gold to turn-of-the-century miners who founded boom towns on the rich mineral deposits found there. Trails and trains brought settlers hopeful of a new beginning. Travelers on the way west settled in towns like the infamous Tombstone, defended the desert outpost of Fort Huachuca, or started a new life in towns like Benson. Communion with nature and the indomitable pioneering spirit of discovery live on into the present day in this tough and beautiful land. The geology of the region lends itself not only to the mineral riches of mining, but also to the mineral riches of caving. The area's combination of natural faults, limestone, and water offer Mother Nature an opportunity to craft some of her most breathtaking handiwork. To be the first to uncover such a treasure is a caver's dream, and two such cavers were University of Arizona roommates Randy Tufts and Gary Tenen, the discoverers of Kartchner Caverns. It was a cool November day in 1974 when Randy Tufts and Gary Tenen set off for the Whetstones in search of caves.
Randy and I were roommates in the early 70s. We shared a house with a number of other people and got to know each other better and like each other, and had similar interests in terms of hiking and outdoor activities. And Randy had a background in geology, and so he would pull out the geologic maps and find areas that would be prone to cave formation, certain types of limestone, and then we would go out and hunt for caves.
We asked a miner who was working a small claim in the area. You know, you'd think we would have asked somebody perhaps sooner, but we didn't. We finally asked this fellow, and he said, "Oh yeah, there is a cave around here." We were very surprised to hear that. Where is this cave? And he pointed back to some small hills that we'd been passing by trip after trip on the way into the main mountain range. And we knew that the hills were limestone, but we thought they were too small for a cave, and so we had ignored them. We went back to that hill and found a sinkhole.
This could go. Yeah. This could really go. The entrance to the cave is actually fairly large sinkhole, 20 feet across, 15 feet across. Goes down about 12, 15 feet. But it happens to be situated right in a little depression in a hill where it's almost invisible until you're right on top of it. How far is that sink?
So we went down at the bottom of the hole. Of course, it was a cool day, and there was a breeze coming up out of the hole. This was something that hadn't been there before, 7 years earlier.
Really cool.
Most large caves exhale and inhale, making a breeze from a hole in the Earth's surface, an indication of a possible cave.
And so with that incentive, Gary squeezed down through the hole. And was able to get into a small room under the bottom of the sinkhole, and that was the beginning of the discovery.
That first room people had probably been there. There was not overwhelming signs of people, because in many caves you'll have spray paint and trash, and it didn't have that problem, but it looked like probably people had been in that first room. After the first room, we continued to explore and found a second room. And the second room was actually a fairly large room, except it had about a 15-inch ceiling, so it was a fairly low room. And on one end of it, there was a standing passage that we were able to negotiate. And essentially, at the end of that passage, Randy found a crawlway that was blowing air.
And so I squeezed into it, and it was a low crawl. It was not, I mean, it was, you know, eight inches high, perhaps, and maybe 15 inches wide. Not very big at all. Sort of thing that if you're claustrophobic, it's not what you want to think about. And so I crawled through it and went about 20 feet, 25 feet, and it stopped. The crawlway just stopped dead. There was a barrier of rock that went across it with a little hole about 3 or 4 inches in diameter sitting right in the middle of the rock barrier. And the air was just coming through that little hole.
We really couldn't even pass each other very well in there, and turning around was a major endeavor. But we had our packs, and together, working in the passage, we opened up that small hole. Luckily, it wasn't flowstorm formations, it was just rock. I'm not sure what we would have done if it was a beautiful formation. We probably would have just backed out and left.
Finally, we got the thing open. I remember we knocked out a few key chunks of rock. And Gary was the one who widened it finally to the point where he could get through. He squeezed through. He had to exhale and take his belt off, and he got through it. And he went on a little ways, and he turned around and came back and said, well, it seems to keep going, which, of course, is the criteria for a cave. Does it keep going? And so maybe you ought to come through. So we had to, since I'm a little bigger, we had to widen it a little bit more. And so I squeezed through.
I wasn't yet convinced that it really kept on going, but it didn't stop. And so then I came back, and working from the other side of the hole, was able to enlarge it enough for Randy to get through, and then we continued for a ways in terms of exploration. We kept pushing the passage, and I kept on thinking, well, it's got to stop eventually. You dream of things like this, but you don't really, I don't know, I've expected it to really happen.
I thought we were dreaming, you know. And if we were to blink, it might go away. So I just kept opening my eyes, just looking at everything.
Can you see any of the translucent colors?
What we didn't know at the time, was that we had just entered the virgin portion of the cave. Up to that little tight area, which we then called the blowhole, it had been visited by people. We know who they are. We've talked to them since then. But after that point, it was completely unexplored. You just look at everything. You just realize that every gaze you cast on everything, it's the first time that thing has ever been seen. It's almost as though you're bringing it into being by looking at it.
There was no sign of any footprints or any human habitation, any human impact whatsoever. And throughout the entire cave, we've never seen anything, and we've found no other entrances. The way we got in was the first way, and the only way.
I remember when we walked into the last room we were in, it turned out to be a room maybe 75 feet across, but it looked huge. It looked humongous. It looked like it went forever, you know, and I thought, geez, this just keeps going and going.
At that time, we used miner's lamps, which have a little acetylene flame on them, and it's a very effective light in a small cave, but in a larger cave, it's pretty weak. We stood up on a ridge and shined our carbide lamps out, and all there was blackness. You couldn't see the far wall, and we got pretty excited at that point.
There's something very appealing, in maybe some strange way, to being in total darkness. For people who haven't ever been in total darkness, it puts you very much in touch with your own reality, I think, because that's the only thing that seems to exist is you at that moment, and you can't even sense if somebody puts their hand in front of your face, you can't feel it. The reason we stopped after about 300 feet is we suddenly said to ourselves, oops, no, nobody knows where we are. You know, if anything, if the floor were to open up beneath us and swallow us, you know, they would find our car outside, but that's it. Even though at the point we stopped, it seemed like it was opening up and continuing. We could see dark portals leading out of the room that we stopped in.
On the second trip, when we found the big room, that was when we really went, oh my, we really have something here.
Then we split up, actually. Gary went on to the same place that we'd been before, and I noticed a lead up to the left, and I climbed up. And I ended up coming out into what's called the big room. And the name was apt, because I went through this portal up at the top of a rubble pile, and again with my little carbide lamp, and I could not see the far wall. I could not see the far wall. It was a room that was filled with a central column of formations that kind of divide the room in half. And I could hear Gary's voice off to one side because the rooms are all sort of connected together there, but couldn't see him. So there was this ghostly echoing of his voice and reverberating off this big black cavity. And I mean, that was the moment for me when I realized that we had really found something. You know, this was something. And this wasn't just a small cave. This was a big cave, and it was beautiful. And we were the only people anywhere, anytime, who'd ever seen it.
People ask, what do you say? What do you think? And I'm always sort of embarrassed that we didn't have anything profound. I mean, we just giggled a lot. I mean, that was really what we did. And it was later on that we contemplated the impact of what we had found and our responsibility in taking care of it.
I mean, we were the representatives of the human race there. And you know, you feel very responsible at that kind of moment. From the sinkhole entrance of the cave, you can look down to the east, and a half a mile away, you see Arizona Highway number 90. It's only a half mile away. The cars are going, you can hear the cars, you can see the cars going by. There was nothing that prevented anybody else from doing what we had just done that day. And we knew that. We knew that some people had been in the front part of the cave, but even the small exploration we did the first day told us that nobody had been past the blowhole. And so here was a place that was real attractive. We didn't know how far it went. We felt like we had to be real careful with that knowledge.
To protect the cave, Randy and Gary kept it a secret for 14 years.
Randy and I are often asked, you know, how do you keep a secret? Why do you do that? And I would like to think, I do think, that most people in the same situation, coming upon such a treasure, would be completely awestruck as we were, and realize that it needed some action and behavior that was probably different than they'd ever behaved before. And I don't really think that we did anything that unusual in keeping this secret. I think that most people would have been just overwhelmed with a sense of responsibility. The initial plan was just keep it a secret. If you just don't tell anybody about it, it's probably going to be okay.
So one thing we did was we always stashed our stuff in the trunk or camouflaged it in the backseat, whatever, so that no one else would recognize that anybody was there caving. That was one thing we did.
We would keep very low to the ground, and we would make sure that there was no traffic on the dirt road in front of the cave. And if there was, we would just go back in the sinkhole or hide behind a bush until the traffic would pass.
When it became evident that secrecy would no longer protect the cave, Randy and Gary sought other means.
A couple years went on, we realized that that wasn't going to work forever, that somebody else could discover it just like we did.
And the only time we did begin to talk about it again was when we developed a new approach for protection, which was developing the cave as a park. That was a step that we came to after about 3 or 4 years.
With discovering this cave came an obligation for stewardship. It was obvious that we had found something, and we, in finding it, had to accept the responsibility for it. It's almost like having a child and then taking on the responsibility that comes with raising that child. We could not just leave it. We have seen so many caves that have been completely stripped of formations, spray painted, just terrible things. Trash just brought in. It's just amazing the things people bring into caves. And the thought that this cave, with all its beauty, could have that happen to it. If we didn't take some care of it, I mean, we just wouldn't be able to live with ourselves. You know, if you look at all the problems in protecting the cave, it's near a population center, it's near a road, it's a fairly level cave that, so once you get in through the tight spots, it's fairly easily negotiable. That if you take all those problems and you just look at it from another way, there are all advantages if we can turn this into a tour cave.
You would no longer have the problem of vandalism. The place would be supervised. And what's more, it becomes an educational resource.
Developing as a tour cave became, in our mind, the best way to provide long-term stewardship.
The first thing was we had to find out who owned it, who owned the land. We had thought it was public land. It turned out that it wasn't. It turned out that it was owned by exactly the right person, Mr. James Kartchner and his family from St. David. One of the greatest things about Kartchner Caverns is that it's named after a teacher. Mr. Kartchner was a teacher. I mean, obviously, he was a rancher also, but his primary interest was teaching. We approached Mr. Kartchner on February 20th, 1978. I'll never forget it. Gary and I drove down with slides in our hand. We'd researched the Kartchners before, so we had a pretty good idea that they would be trustworthy and good stewards of the cave once we told them about it. We walked up to Mr. Kartchner in the front yard of his property and said, "Mr. Kartchner, you don't know us, but we've found something on your land we think you ought to know about."
We showed him pictures of his cave and showed him pictures of what could happen if we didn't come up with a good stewardship plan. And he was very perceptive.
He said, "Oh, over in that property near the whetstones." So he knew a little bit about geology. And he said, "You know, we found brachiopods fossils over there." So when he said that, you know, we sort of breathed some sigh of relief because he had some understanding of some of the scientific aspects, which suggested to us that he would be a good steward.
He wanted to see it, and he quickly realized the importance of the secret.
Gary and I met Mr. Kartchner and 5 of his sons at the cave site and took him in to see it. Now, they had never been in a cave before.
It really took about an hour or two just to get into the big room. But once in there, it was a sensory overload. I mean, when we first made the trip, we did the entire trip from front to back.
They were completely awestruck also. It became the family jewel.
It was just a complete spiritual experience. We certainly felt a sense of obligation, but also felt very keenly about the need to protect it, and that's why we went to such measures to do so.
They, along with us, kept that secret. So the secret for 14 years kept on expanding, but people developed a love and a passion for it.
The initial question we put to them was, would you develop it yourself? We didn't think, we couldn't imagine that we could get this done through a government and keep it quiet while the arrangements were being made.
We looked at doing it as a tour cave through the federal government. We looked at doing it as a research facility. We looked at doing it as a tour cave privately.
So there was a lot of thought given to it. But they eventually concluded that they didn't have the money or the expertise, and so they said, no, sadly, we don't think we can do this. We still want to protect it because it needs that, but us as a developer is not a good idea.
Randy had heard that Arizona State Parks was being encouraged to expand because the state park system within Arizona was one of the smallest in the country, and so they were out looking for areas that they could develop into state parks.
A big problem, though, for them was how to actually bring it into the state park system while keeping it secret. Just how do you do that? Because there are votes and, you know, legislative actions that have to be taken. And it wasn't until the current state parks director, Ken Travis, arrived, who's a person of considerable vision and considerable leadership, that he was able to find a way with some key legislators and with the help of the Nature Conservancy, find a way to thread their way through the labyrinth of legislative approval that was required to make it a state park.
We needed some real expertise, and we needed some people to step out on the line for us and protect the cave and get it financially squared away before we even went to the legislature.
We did go to the extent quite early of bringing Governor Bruce Babbitt to see the cave, because the real element was the commitment of the state and the interests of the state. Babbitt saw the cave. He was very impressed. He told the State Parks Department that he was interested in it, and that attracted their attention to have the governor supportive of the project. He involved the Nature Conservancy.
Nature Conservancy stepped up, and even though this didn't have any endangered species on it, which is really the Nature Conservancy's mission, they stepped up knowing that it was an important piece of property to save, and got the option that they then sold to us.
The Nature Conservancy purchased the cave and enough surface land to create a park. This paved the way to secure legislative support.
So the day of the vote, then, when it was finally becoming before the legislature, still that day, very few people knew about it. We wanted to get it all done right away.
So we went first to the House, and they passed something, and they passed the vote. I felt every bit as, sort of detached from reality at that moment as I did when I found the cave.
Because Kartchner Caverns is a living cave, and we want to keep it that way, we have to be very careful in maintaining the humid, wet environment.
We didn't know how it stayed wet. We didn't know what were the contributing factors to keep it growing, because it's a live cave. The formations are still growing, and we had to find all of that out. To find that out, we had to find out who knew about those types of things.
With legislation passed, cave stewardship became Arizona State Park's responsibility. Environmental studies led to years of careful development work, always keeping the cave's preservation as the primary concern.
Environmental studies are extremely important because there are a lot of unknowns as we go into an operational phase. It's important to do these studies over the long run because with baseline figures already established, monitoring conditional changes inside the cave during the development phase shows us how much we are affecting the cave. We have been studying since 1989 with ACPI and then later on with the park staff itself, doing all the monitoring.
There have been caves that have been killed by humans. Not all caves die a natural death. People have been guilty of killing caves by opening up air chambers and passages, by creating parking lots or other obstructions that disallow the water movement through the cave.
And we were very, very concerned that if we made any kind of error at all, that we would only have one chance. We couldn't recoup that error.
The fragile environment of a living cave means formations or speleotherms continue to grow inside Kartchner Caverns. Familiar stalactites and stalagmites, thin hollow tubes called soda straws, draperies of cave bacon, and gravity-defiant helictites are only some of the beautiful mineral structures decorating the cave's interior.
We want to make sure that the cave that you see today is the cave that people can enjoy 1,000 or 10,000 years from now.
We studied the cave's geology, its mineralogy. We studied the various types of creatures that use it. We studied water flow, because water is, in this case, is the lifeblood of the cave. It was then time to take this information and use it to begin development of the cave.
Airlock doors and misters were part of the special steps taken to maintain the cave's environment.
The cave's design and construction has been a very organic element in this whole construction process. We have let the cave tell us where we need to go.
We pulled all of our protective barriers down this morning to kind of get a look at what the trail's looking like.
It would have been very easy for us to say, here's absolutely how it has to be. We didn't do that. And that's one of the things that took us a little bit longer than we anticipated.
But we had to go through all this stuff to figure out that it wasn't going to be our intelligence that was going to get us there. It was going to be our desire.
Well, every time I go in there, I see something new. And that's the way the cave trail was built. Something new would be discovered or something new would be found along the cave trail path or off the cave trail path, and we'd extend the trail. to meet that so the visitor can see those things that we have discovered and found.
We have been successful in transferring the conservation ethic as it came from Randy and Gary into the men and women who are working inside the cavern every day. They take a special pride in their work, special pride in blending things together.
We take a lot of care. I take a lot of care, and I expect the workers to take a lot of care in building this because it's going to be here for a long, long time.
Inside the cavern, we are unable to use many of the tools that are commonly used in construction, either because we're concerned that they could pollute the caverns or they could vibrate too much for the caverns.
We can use some hydraulics, we can use some electric mixers.
As you can see, we create a lot of fog, and we're real particular about our oil. As you can see, all the guys on my crew, they all carry a rag to try to catch every little drop that might have a tendency to fall off.
The painstaking efforts of the construction workers ensure not only a safe and comfortable tour for the guest without harming any formations, but also blend the trail artistically into the cave environment, preserving its natural beauty.
Landslide happens. Move your landslide out.
Mostly, it's just hard physical work, moving big rocks and little rocks and creating these walls that will blend into the walls there for the trail.
As you can see up in here, this area here, this is all laid rock with mortar. I'm doing my best not to show any mortar. That's one of our great challenges in this cave, is not to have anything look man-made. So it is quite a challenge because you want to zigzag your rocks and make them look like this is all just fallen rock here.
It's just a lot of hard work, and you will find when you talk to the people who work here, they've all been captured by it.
It's beautiful in here, and it's something that's going to be here forever. Being able to leave your legacy behind on a project, you don't get that option very much.
One of the construction workers who was here, we were chatting one day, and he made the comment that he was putting more effort into this than he normally would on another project. He said, because this is one place, I'm going to bring my grandkids. And I don't want my grandkids coming up to me and say, Grandpa, you screwed up.
For the whole thing to pan out at the end, it takes everybody's talent, and everybody knows that this is their life's work. This is not something they'll ever get a chance to do again. This is the back way up into the imaginary room. You can see we're getting some long drops off into the down below.
We were developing the upper cave and basically the plans for the upper cave. And we knew that we wanted to connect the rotunda and the throne room. There were several different plans. Several of them would require tunneling. Others would just be seen as very costly. And so we were scratching our heads as to how we could connect these two chambers.
And the reason we call this next area the imaginary room is we imagined we could get through this area, and the engineers imagined that we were crazy for thinking that we could.
Well, I asked the cave master planner to take a look at it as he was going to do some cave exploration that weekend. About 3 days later, he came back to me and he goes, you know what? It's not in your imagination. That room is not imaginary. It does exist. And thus, we connected those two chambers, basically the rotunda and the throne room, through the imaginary chamber.
It's the imaginary passage, which I think I'm the most proud of.
Much of what you see here at this park is inspired by the architecture, the natural geometry of the cave, the formations and the crystals that create the formations themselves.
To really get an appreciation for the cave, you need to know what you're looking at. Much more beyond what a stalactite is or a stalagmite is. The tour is designed to provide the visiting public with an appreciation of Kartchner Caverns, how the cave was formed and developed over millions of years.
The cave is a living organism, and not an organism such as in biology. Obviously, it doesn't breathe as we breathe. It doesn't have a heart as we have a heart, but it is a growing organism. Water will continue to cause this cave to grow, just as any living organism grows. When you see the cave today, imagine it 10,000 years from now. If you were a visitor 10,000 years from now, you will see a completely different cave. Many of the formations you see will be gone, many more will have grown, and many more new ones will have been created.
Sometimes we call it a jewel, that if we cut it, we want to make sure that we increase the value and not decrease the value like a diamond. Other times we talk about it being a live organism, that if we're going to bring people into it and invade it, we don't want to invade it in such a way that we kill it.
At some point, every cave has what we'll call a carrying capacity, a point at which more traffic to the cave will cause a degradation of the environment. And the Arizona State Parks is committed to keeping below that point.
So it was a balance between optimizing the protection of the cave and in providing incredible opportunities for our visitors through education.
After the first trip, when we realized that we had found a virgin cave, we started to realize the impact that we were having. Every place that we stepped, no one had ever stepped before. Much of the floor was very fragile, whether it was crystal or mud with cracks in it. Nobody had ever touched that. And we could see where we stepped the damage that we were causing, and decided that we would only step in a small area. In many wild caves that people go to that as recreational caves, the whole floor will be trampled. There will be nothing on the floor, and people probably think that, well, man, that's the way it was. It was always just a mud floor that didn't have any features. And really, a cave is like being inside a geode. I mean, the whole area has formations and features. And if you can manage to avoid trampling the whole floor surface, you'll keep it that way.
There are parts of the cave where we have trails cutting through large rooms, and you can often across mud floors. The rotunda room in the cave is an excellent example of that, where we just kept rigorously, religiously to one trail route, because there's, once you've established a trail, there's no reason to go off it. We had to be sure that we didn't hurt the cave ourselves. And how do you do that? First of all, you're just very careful not to touch anything. I mean, a cave is a non-renewable resource. The formations that we see growing in these things have been growing for thousands and thousands of years, tens of thousands of years.
We can do so much damage in such little time. Something that took so long to evolve, took so long to be created, that for me, deadlines of time weren't as important anymore. Because in order to do it right and to protect something that took so long to evolve, it had to be done right.
Kartchner Caverns is a great asset to the people of Arizona. It's a beautiful cave, and it's a great economic asset to the southern Arizona area. It is an important asset because it's beautiful, and it's beautiful because it's in pristine condition. And it's important that we do everything we can to keep it that way.
I've always felt that you need to leave things better than you find them. Whether it's going on a picnic and leaving the picnic ground cleaned up a little bit compared to how it was when you got there, or whether it's conserving a cave that you discover. Well, the cave wasn't asking to be discovered. It was minding its own business. We found it. And we felt that nobody else knew that it was here as far as we knew. And it was just our obligation, our responsibility to take care of it. If we didn't take care of it, who would? We couldn't count on the next person who found it to be in charge of it. We knew that we were aware of the cave. We had to take care of it.
The whole idea here is not to entertain. We want people to walk away from here with a sense of stewardship, that they are responsible into the future for this cave. We're not talking, we want this to last another 20 or 30 years and feel good about it. We're talking about this, we want it to last for thousands of years.
The extra care required to work around formations and only with hand tools took extra time.
It wasn't this week's schedule or next week's schedule. I had on my kitchen table an 80,000-year-old bone. But 80,000 years in the life of cave is just, it's just a flash in the pan.
Of course, the cave is an ongoing natural entity, and it's going to have to be monitored. Who knows how it's going to respond to the large numbers of people that come in. That's going to have to be watched very carefully, and we hope that people will fall in love with it just like we did, and will exert their influence as necessary to support the Parks Department in taking good care of it.
About half of Kartchner Caverns is going to be developed for public tours. The other half is going to be left undeveloped in pristine condition. And there's some very beautiful areas that are, they're just magnificent. Very hard to get to in very delicate areas. And in the process of turning the cave into a tour cave, we're protecting the entire cave. And so the visitor should be comforted by the fact that that most of the cave is, or at least half the cave is never going to be trampled by people and will be left in its natural state. And our great-great-grandchildren will be able to visit the cave and see it essentially as it is today. Our hope would be that the public, when seeing this cave, will have the same passion for it and the same love for it, and be struck with that sense of stewardship and responsibility that we were, and we'll take care of it as they travel through the cave on their visit.
This cave belongs to all of us. It started with us. Gary and I were the first people that saw it, the first people that knew about it. Then we expanded that to the Kartchners when we approached them about taking care of the cave themselves. And when they couldn't, and we approached the state Parks Department, we expanded the circle even more. And then when the state legislature approved it as a state park, that meant that the circle expands to include everybody in the state of Arizona, and really everybody in the United States and the world as far as I'm concerned. And so each of us has an opportunity to do something to take care of this place. And this is a great example of a small number of people having a big influence. People all the time say, oh, what can one person do? You can do amazing things if you work at it. If you just get focused and develop a plan and stay on it. It's remarkable what can happen.
AOT and the Arizona tourism industry are indeed thrilled to mark this momentous grand opening of our Kartchner Caverns State Park.
To accept and to care for what nature refined, moment by moment, one drop at a time.
I mean, this has been a 25-year project for us. It was 14 years before the legislation passed. It's been 11 years since. The people in state parks who have been involved for that length of time. You just hang in there. You just decide what it is you want to bring about and just work at it.
With the cave safe and protected, we look back to find that its story is as much about stewardship as it is discovery. Will we learn what the cave is trying to teach us? conservation family of Kartchner Caverns now extends to each visitor.
Visitors to Kartchner Caverns need to be stewards of the caverns and to natural areas everywhere. That stewardship is going to require patience on their part. For one reason, right now only about 800 people a day can get inside the caverns. They need to be patient because the reason for those numbers is so they have a quality experience and that we don't harm the caverns. So they may need to be patient and wait for their turn to visit Kartchner Caverns. That's part of their stewardship.
This is a legacy to everyone, including basically the people who placed and put this program together. The people who come and visit this park, it's a legacy to them and to their children and children's children.
I think the real challenge that the public will need to keep in mind is that it needs to be preserved, and what took thousands, hundreds of thousands of years to develop needs to be preserved, so tens of thousands of years from now it'll be as pristine as we see it today, so that they can appreciate what we have today.
The land calls us now for a commitment to stewardship. The history of Kartchner Caverns State Park and its careful development set a shining example for us of the preservation of wild places, for ourselves and for our children. A place to come for communion with nature for generations is as important now as it was in the past, and possibly even more so for the future. Each of us has our own personal story of commitment to preservation of the earth and taking it forward into the new millennium. Stories like this one about Ken Travis and a special experience with a tree from his childhood.
It was a magical place. And I remember sitting down underneath it. I'm only 10 or 11 years old. And I remember sitting down underneath that tree, and I was thinking youthful thoughts and thought, you know, I could just imagine myself that I'm the first one that ever sat underneath this tree. And then I looked down, and there was a tin can that was discarded by somebody who had evidently been sitting there, and I was crestfallen. I was just, I pumped myself up with this rarefied air, and somebody, by leaving that can there, had just burst my balloon, and it made me mad. I started picking up litter before it was cool to pick up litter. But that just really bothered me, and I just wondered if there was any place left that man hadn't done that. You know, is there any place left where I can go sit down underneath a tree and not have to start looking for that tin can? And 30 years later,